We gotta get the heat on. Let's get to it. So before we can install these radiators, we first have to install the wooden baseboard that goes behind it. Shane will put up all the baseboard, at least where the radiators are going, and Tracy painted them. Instead of using finish nails, we're using these really small screws. They were recommended to us by a contractor friend of mine.
Do I look good with my glasses?
Yeah, you're cute with the glasses.
With my hair up in my little weird bun.
So the boiler we installed is a high efficiency boiler, and it's direct vent. So it actually pulls air from the outside. You can see I'm piping that duct pipe that brings fresh air into the boiler for combustion. The gray pipe next to it is the exhaust. That's made out of CPVC, which takes higher heat and is safer for venting. We used to be able to vent with PVC, but they're starting to find that's a problem, so we no longer do that. This process went pretty quickly. It's a short run for the exhaust, which was pretty good because that gray pipe is actually extremely expensive right now. See here, I'm starting to drill out the pipes for the radiator. I was going to use a spade bit, but I decided to use a hole saw instead, just to give a cleaner cut. What I ended up finding out is even using the hole saw, typically you don't get blowout on the back side of the board that you're drilling, but unfortunately I ended up getting pretty good blowout on this. You can see there, that hole wasn't too bad, but this one here, a big chip came off, which I ended up gluing that back on. It was a little discouraging because I thought I was being careful, but it actually just blew out a weak part of that pine board. Yeah. But on the other side, I got a little smarter. And you'll see that in a couple minutes. Shane's running the feed and return for that radiator, and we're running that in a area that's going to be covered by a fake beam. Right there you can see the floating shelves that I'll show later in the video. Tracy's doing cleanup duty. That's a constant thing that needs to be done during a project like this, or it'll get really discouraging. So here I'm drilling out the other radiator that's on the other side of the room. I'm using a pretty good size hole saw for this, but you can see I got a little smarter this time, and I'm drilling from the top first and now doing a nice finished cut on the bottom. Why I'm worried about the holes on this, this is all going to be exposed and you'll be able to see it, so we want it to be kind of a finished product. So those holes came out much better. So now Shane has prepped the fittings to pick up this radiator, and we'll tie those in after. At this point I was able to get the pipes dropped through the floor for all the other radiators, and this radiator was going to be a little tougher because it's set on tile, and we didn't pre-drill them because we weren't exactly sure where we were going to put the radiator. So I got one of those holes drilled. We're using basically a carbide tipped hole saw, and it works great with this tile. It goes right through it, but it's a wet saw. I mean, it's a wet drill bit. So this holder right here, our guide, actually receives water. You put water in it, and it keeps that bit cool and lubricated. But the problem is the holes were too close to the baseboard. So I ended up doing it freehand, which I actually just poured water on the floor. And by tilting the bit and starting the bit slow, you get to score the tile, and it gives you a chance to get the bit started so it don't wander on you. So basically you have to hold it real tight and start it real slow, and it will score the tile enough where it'll just catch, find its groove. Once you get a groove in the tile, you're all set. You can just drill away. But you do want to keep adding water to the hole. Even the amount that I added really wasn't enough. I should have been adding more water to this, but it still worked all right. It didn't ruin the bit. Usually if you don't give it enough water, it'll overheat the bit and actually dull it, so you won't be able to use it again. But I didn't have that problem here. I think the bit's new enough where it stayed good for a good amount of time. Once I get drilling, I kind of oscillate back and forth, so it kind of grabs on each side of the hole. And like I'm showing here, I keep adding water to it. It worked really well. I used that to go through the tile and a little bit of the backer board underneath it. So now that I have those holes through the tile, I decided to drill through using a 1-inch spade bit. 1 inch is definitely big for the pipe that's going to be going through it, but I'm going to be covering up these holes with discussions anyway, so they can be a little bit bigger. So I drilled that through, made sure that I always make sure there's no wires directly underneath it, and you can see why, because there's a wire right there, but it was further enough away that it didn't give me any problems. Now moving the radiator into place. This one wasn't too bad to move. The other ones were definitely tough to move, but this one was pretty small. So these radiators were taken out of multiple houses, and they're typically just cut off when they remove them. But you can see here, whoever installed these, the misconception that with these type of fittings that it helps to Teflon tape the threads, and in reality that don't seal the pipe at all. So putting Teflon tape on it doesn't help at all. It's a tapered compression joint, so the Teflon tape actually hinders the tightening because it makes it harder to turn the nut, which pulls in the tapered fitting. So an important thing was to remove all that Teflon tape. And later I'll show you, I typically use a little bit of pipe dope, especially oil-based pipe dope, and it just lubes up those surfaces. It doesn't necessarily seal them as much as it lubricates and makes it so you can make it that little bit more tight. So you can see here, because the radiators were just cut out when they were removed, I have to remove the pipe and fittings that are in the tapered compression joint fittings. So at this point here, I'm just taking those out and soldering into them pipe and then fittings to receive the PEX. So at this point here, now that I have the old fitting out, you want to just make sure the fitting that you're going to be soldering to is really clean on the inside. You won't be able to get all the solder out of them. So what I typically do is match whatever solder was originally in that fitting. So in old systems like this, they used to use 50-50 solder. So I'm gonna use that to replace that on that fitting. But all the new fittings, I'm gonna use 95.5 solder, which has no lead in it. This never comes in this water never comes in human contact. You never drink it or anything, so it can have lead in it. That's not a problem. But I typically like, on general use, to use 95.5 solder. So here you can see I'm putting new fittings on it, and I'm gonna solder those up. I'd like to do a video on how to solder a fitting correctly. You can see here I'm really cleaning the pipe, cleaning the fittings, and then putting a thin layer of flux on both the fitting and the pipe. You want to make sure that the flux touches every part of the surface that you want solder to go. If you don't put flux, solder will not stick. And that is true at every time that you solder. Some people will put a little dab of solder and think flux, and they'll think it will flow around, but it don't. It won't. It'll only stay right where you touch it. So you'll notice here I'm soldering with the 50-50. You'll notice the end of my solder, I put a curve on it. I typically like to do that because it's easier to touch the surface around the whole pipe. If it's straight, you have to do a lot more effort to touch the solder everywhere around the pipe. You can notice here that I can reach right around it very easily. If I'm straight like this, I have to make a lot of effort to reach around. A lot of people think you can touch a solder and it'll just flow around the pipe. And it does to a certain extent, but I've found in my experience that if you touch the solder around the whole fitting where the solder's supposed to go, it makes for a much better joint. So here I'm just cutting a pipe to prep for another radiator. Now I'm just gonna throw these back together. You'll notice I have a PEX adapter at the bottom of that. Still trying to get the Teflon tape off. A wire brush or a fitting brush works pretty good to scrape that off. Here you can see I'm using a crescent wrench to tighten up that nut. I'm just gonna snug it for right now. A lot of times I see people use these incorrectly. Typically you want the smaller jar on the downside of tightening, and it won't slip off. But I guess it works both ways, but that's typically how you want to use it. It's a tighter connection. So now you can see all those radiators are set. The bathroom one is set through the floor. Now we're gonna go through and tie them all the pecs in. I'm not gonna do a video on that because you've already seen us do that multiple times. But I'll just show you what it ended up looking. We also got that one tied in, which we had to do a little repiping of that just to make it look straight and make it so it was in better condition than it was. This radiator is tied in. This radiator is a little small for this room. It's a small room anyway, but the first floor is gonna give a lot of heat to this room up here. So we kind of kept that radiator a little small. And in Shane's room, we got this big radiator. That's a big ass radiator right there. Really heavy. That was heavy to bring up the stairs, but we got that all tied in. I'll show you in the boiler room. So that radiator drops down right there into copper. Why I drop it into copper is it gives a little stability in case that radiator wants to start leaning. It has a little rigidity instead of going pecs right up to the radiator. That copper will give it a little bit of strength. I mean, it's so heavy, it's not gonna move, but you never know. Like in the basement for the bathroom radiator, we tied those in. Those were a little tight, but it worked out pretty well. This also, we went through the joists to give it a little stability. So if that radiator ever wanted to tilt, it's locked right in here and right here as it goes through the joists. And this one in here, that one's tied in, that's that kitchen radiator. All right guys, well that's gonna be it for today's video. We got all the radiators tied in. We were able to drop the second floor radiators down. We transitioned to copper and then we transitioned again to PEX. The reason we did that is because that copper part is gonna be exposed. Shane kind of wants the industrial look here, so he wants to leave some of that mechanical stuff exposed. But right here, it transitions back to PEX, which is a lot cheaper than the copper. And that area right across there is gonna be covered with a fake beam. That's gonna have a LED light above it that's gonna shine up. It's gonna look pretty cool. So that's gonna go all the way across here. We're gonna put up another joist here just to help support that. We got the other radiators tied in. This one's tied in. I'll show you what we did in the basement. This radiator in the bathroom, which you saw earlier, we got that tied in, and that's all tied in the basement. We are now officially ready for heat. I am not going to show the process of starting up this boiler because I really believe any work that's done on the boiler, starting the boiler, should only be done by professionals. I would hate to ever hear that by watching my videos, somebody tried to start their own boiler and either blew up their house or got poisoned by carbon monoxide. So I will not be showing that, but I did want to show you the connections of the radiators and the basic layout of the heating. I feel like that's just good overall knowledge of what is going on in your house if you have a similar system. This room in here, just so you know, it looks pretty crappy, but this is a center location, or a location where a lot of the utilities come down. So we're gonna leave this exposed. We're gonna actually remove some of that sheetrock and keep this exposed until everything's done. And this will probably be the very last room to get finished, because we wanna always have the option of being able to run wires or pipes or speaker cable, you know, anything. This is gonna be an overall utility room in here. That's why the boiler is in that area. I just want to let you know, just so you're wondering why it looks so crappy in here. So I'm just gonna finish up with just showing you some of the stuff Shane's been up to while he's been working here during the week. He got this sink at Habitat for Humanity, and it's a wall hung sink, and he made a substructure under it that actually holds it up. And he wants to have this so it's like one of those levitating cabinets. So he's gonna have that as a substructure to actually hold up the sink. The sink has brackets so it holds itself anyway to the wall, but this just gives it a little bit more structure. And then he's gonna finish it off with these rough sawn boards. It should look pretty cool when it's done. But he has on order his faucet and also his trim for this here. He's gonna go with a brushed finish. That's a Cola valve, and he's also getting a Cola valve for there. He's gonna use the old toilet for a while. It might seem a little gross, but he's just kind of watching his budget right now, coming to the end of the project. You can see here that plywood substructure that's holding up that sink actually comes in and secures itself to the studs. So it's kind of like gusseted to the studs here and makes it very strong. You can see those lags that hold that sink itself into the wall. This is some of the other things he's been doing. He wanted to have no upper cabinets because he wanted to leave everything kind of open. So he wanted to make some shelves like this here. They're kind of cool. They're from the wood that was sawn on this property. So he made up some shelves. They look pretty good. Good contrast with the colored cabinets and the granite countertop, and kind of go with the beams on the ceiling. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today. We got a lot accomplished this weekend. Next time we make a video, the heat should be on. I think we have probably like a month left that we could have not had heat. But you know what? I'd rather be ahead of schedule at this point than worrying about the house freezing up. But that's going to be it for today. The next video, I think we're going to be doing some what I call finished plumbing, which will be setting the fixtures, and the heat will be on. We'll set the temperatures on the water heater. I'll show you how to do that. And we'll be on track for Shane to move in, or move back in, I should say. But I appreciate everyone being here and following this process. It's been quite an experience for Shane, and he's been doing awesome through this. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to remodel a house like this, but it's definitely well worth it, especially in this economic climate we're in right now. Things are so expensive, so anything that you can do to bring your prices down definitely help. All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here, and I will see you on the next video.